do you feel like you can, do you feel like you have the same kind of sex or a different kind of sex than your mother?
What?
Do you feel like you have access to being a different kind of sexual person than your mother was able to be?
I mean, like, sort of, not really. I don't know. My mom went to a co-ed school, so she had, like, and I've never asked her if she had, like, experiences with women. So I don't really necessarily feel like I could have, like, different sex from her.
I knew about Pasolini as a fictional filmmaker, also as a poet, through some of his political writings, but it was really this film that I'm interested in, Comisi de Amor, that sort of maybe synthesized everything, brought everything together for me in relation to who he was as a person, who he was as a political figure, who he was as a gay man, who he was as a filmmaker. And in that way, it's been a film that has been kind of always really engaging and fascinating for me, and it stuck around a lot. I watch it all the time. And only recently, in conversation with Massimiliano Gionno, in terms of preparing for this show, did I decide to address it more specifically in my work. One of the things that I think is really interesting about Pasolini, and that he teases out in this film, is this really deep intersection between sort of the emotional life of people, the psychic life of people, the sexual life of people, and the political lives of people.
Children are people on their own who are not represented by, children have rights, and until they're 18, their parents are their only guardians. So if your parents...
And so in this particular case, I was interested in addressing more directly Comisi de Amor and using it almost as an overlay to a project in which I also go out and do interviews with people. Eventually it will be people all across the US. In this case, for the Biennale, it's one sort of component, one chapter of that ongoing project.
I don't know, there's all this like activism on campus where people are like, but their whole goal is to bring awareness to the problem, which I feel like isn't really the same, because they're not trying to do anything about it. They're just trying to make people aware of it. And like, that's the first step.
In this case, I went to New England to talk to a large group of students who are studying in an all-women's college. What's interesting to me about all-women's colleges is the ways in which they sort of point backwards and forwards. Certainly they come from a very historically based idea of a kind of sex-segregated education model that many other colleges and universities in the US have moved on from. But at the same time, what can happen inside of the boundaries of that social body, the community of students that is there, ends up being incredibly progressive, particularly in terms of experimentation and kind of the formation of gender identity or sexuality and sex.
I think sex and patriotism have a lot to do with each other, especially sex as a woman. I think nationalism is mapped out on women's bodies a lot more than on men's bodies. So women become like cultural markers or like bearers of a cultural identity or a national identity.
I think that one of the things that's interesting about this exhibition is that as artists, or as an artist, I think that I'm always, in some ways, making work that is about where I am in the world. And so even though its particular focus, in this case, might be on 36 students at an all-women's college in New England, in the US, it is also, I am also trying to speak to a larger way in which we form ourselves as people in relation to collectives. So in relation to a nation or an understanding of a nation, in relation to a kind of a cross or cutting through various national identities. And so I think that there is something probably in my work, as in much of the work in the show, that both is singular but also sort of speaks across a large field of inquiring about who we are.
Just clumping me as South Asian, clumping me as woman, clumping me as gay or straight, that bothers me. And I think therein lies this huge problem. And yes, we're in this community which is a fantasy and it's a bubble, but we still have the same problems which we would have in the larger world.